the other things Jesus has to say, Jesus talks about being able to read the signs of what is coming. And he talks about how we sort of can read the signs of the weather, right, so that we can see what's coming. But I think he's trying to get at using that as an example to talk about something deeper, which are the signs of the coming of God. And I want to ask you, before we get started, where have you seen the signs of God in your life? Anyone here? Anyone willing to share some of the signs of where they've seen God in their life? Yes, please. Church. So you knew the right answer, right? That's a good one. What else? Yes.
When things go in an unexpected way, I just look up and say, "You did that, didn't you?"
Okay, great. Okay. Yes.
Recovering from illness.
Recovering from illness, you see that as a sign from God. Thank you very much. Absolutely. Nay.
One time going off an icy road over almost a cliff with 3 kids in the car and just flying through the air like I'm driving an airplane.
Wow.
Landed on all 4 wheels.
Oh my gosh.
Steered clear of the lake.
You're all still here.
God was with me for sure.
A sign of God in your life. Thank you. Anyone else? Carrie?
I was saved from a car accident once. The person abruptly started talking to me, and that's, without making a long story short, that's the step in I thought was a godly presence that saved my life.
Thank you. Yes, please, Linda.
Being present at the birth of my grandchild.
You notice the presence of God as a sign in that. That's another wonderful example. I think that a piece that it runs as a theme through all of these, and one that I would ask you to carry away, that Jesus is talking about as the sure sign of God's presence in our lives, is how we are with each other, how we encourage, how we support, and how we live our lives together. You can't live your life if you've almost lost it, it's given back to you. You see it when a new generation is born. You see it when you come to church. We're going to, probably you could have guessed this, we're going to talk about that a little bit more during this sermon. And it doesn't just look like, you know, if you watch the televangelists or you read Revelations, they're going to tell you that the signs are, I don't know, an earthquake, you know, and that you can tell because of the financial condition of the world, or the Antichrist who is choose your country, the leader, if you've lived long enough. We've had a series of those. God's signs are present in the lives of those who are around you now, who have come before you, and who will come after you. That is the great cloud of witnesses that's mentioned in the story from Hebrews. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but before I do, please, would you join me in prayer? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
So I think some of you may know that my father's a minister, and you may have heard me mention that there are a lot of ministers in my family tree. So, you know, for good or bad, right? That's the way it is. And particularly in my mother's family. So in my mother's family, there was always a deep sense of knowing who you were by the lives of those who came before you. The house she grew up in, which is in St. Paul, Minnesota, just outside of Minneapolis, was a house that my great-grandfather built next to a creek, and that my grandfather remembered being built at the age of 5 and lived in his whole life and raised his 2 children in, and that I remember visiting every summer as a child. And he would tell stories about the trees they had planted outside the house, which to me as a child, it was hard to imagine them ever being tiny, because they were full-size oak trees. And that had been his life, and in that house, you were surrounded by the history of the family. The hallway that led to the stair that went upstairs had a huge collection of portraits and pictures. You know the kind? Not just of your kids and their lives, but of all these different generations going back. And you'd walk by that on your way to and from the stairs to going upstairs. Some of them oil paintings, they went back so far. And then every evening after dinner, it felt like as a child, as we sat out on the screen porch, the stories of the family would begin. And not just the stories of what my grandfather had done or my great-grandfather had done, but the stories of the minister who had ridden the circuit in Wisconsin, and how dangerous that was, and how his son instead began an insurance company for ministers, a mutual ministers insurance company, because it was so dangerous to be out riding in the wilderness that quite often these ministers would have an accident, and these congregations couldn't afford to pay them anything, and this was a way to take care of the widows and their orphans. The stories about further back still, the man who was a minister in New Hampshire in the middle of the 19th century, and after his wife died and the country was on the throes of the Civil War, moved with his adult daughter at the age of 60 to Kansas to help them, before the Civil War, decide whether they were going to enter the nation as a free state or a slave state. Stories that went back, they go back in my family 20 generations. I am named after my great, 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 great grandfather. 20 generations. Peter Hobart, who came over here as a minister in 1635 and started a community just outside of Boston. And he came here with most of the people in that town. As a matter of fact, it's in the records in England that they couldn't tax what remained in the town for 5 years, because most of the people had come over here because he found the King of England to be a despot and someone that he did not believe was following the Word of God, and so they resettled in the new land. So, the lives that show us the signs of God are not just the lives that are around us now. They are the lives that have led us to this place. And whether your story is that you know your story back 20 generations or not, it is equally true for all of us. And that's what Paul is getting at in this reading from Hebrews today. He talks about a faith journey that throws itself back many, 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 many more generations than 20. He goes back to Abraham, walking and waiting to hear from God, and a child that will come to him. He goes back and talks about Isaac. He mentions Jacob, the Israelites in bondage, Samson, David, Samuel, many, many, many more, many of whom their names are lost. But as he says, it is their journey of faith, which he describes as an assurance of things hoped for, a conviction of things not seen, a promise that even if in their lifetimes they do not see the fruits of what it means to have God in their lives, it is coming. And that lasts through their being lost, their making sacrifices to God, journeys of hardship, escaping dangers, being mocked, being persecuted. The signs of God are their lives together, and what they will eventually bear fruit to show us. And it's not only the past. This great cloud of witnesses, these are the cloud of people who have been faithful, includes us as well. We had it here yesterday as part of the confirmation service. Those who were here for that confirmation service had their hands laid on them. Those who came up front, we had 9 members of our congregation, had their hands laid on them by the bishop. And do you know what it takes in the Episcopal Church when they're going to make someone a bishop? Do you know that there's a couple of special things they have to have in that service? Anybody know that you need to have 2 other bishops there? Well, is that just because bishops like other bishops? Maybe. Is it because bishops are there to make sure those bishops aren't saying the wrong thing? Maybe. But it's because they put their hands on that bishop. And in the line of bishops, we believe one laying hands on another goes back all the way to Jesus laying his hands on the apostles and sending them out into the world. And so, when Bishop Wayne yesterday laid his hands on these people here, there was a direct connection, a cloud of witnesses to how we live our lives centered on God that stretched from this moment and their lives right back to Jesus. And the 9 members of our congregation who participated in that, they now are part of that story too. And the challenges and hardships of Hebrews that we heard about the persecutions and the disappointments and the places where they did not recognize God in their lives but remained faithful, they told those stories to each other before that day. And it is their profession of faith that brought them forward. A conviction, as Paul said, that things hoped for but are unseen. And then we participate in that as well. I'm going to change the Eucharistic prayer on you today, so pay attention. I'll promise you, I'll tell you when we get there. Because you know, when we come to the altar every Sunday, part of that prayer includes remembering the great cloud of faithful people who have come before us and that are still with us. Got 4 generations right here, but how much further does it stretch back from that, Georgia? 5, thank you. Yeah. Right, 4 here, but 5 right at the family blood. How much further does it stretch back than that? How much further will our family lives stretch forward? When we come to the altar, you will hear in 2 places, listen for them. Right before the holy, 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 we will say, we join with all those who look to you in hope. And then during the prayer, right after we remember Jesus in the bread and the wine, by name we'll remember some of those who have been faithful. Abraham and Sarah. Isaac, Rachel. And it will say, open our eyes to see your hand at work in the world, and you will see those signs. It's intentional in their lives. So if you want to see the signs of God, look for those signs in the lives of those around you. Fill your life with those who are living with the faith of a promise that they may not see, but that they are certain awaits all of us. Amen.